was raised, homeschooled in Europe, where it was often illegal to do so. He was raised by holistically minded parents who didn't vaccinate and preferred Oriental medicine over conventional. However, upon arriving in the US in 2008, he followed the path of conventional medicine, obtaining a bachelor's in exercise science and then a master's in physician associate studies. After a few years of working in conventional medicine specialties, he opened his own integrative and anti-aging medical practice called Iron Direct Primary Care. Please welcome Stefan Hartman.
Thank you, Karen. So, today's lecture is going to be on other things that are harming you that they say are safe. We all know the obvious one, so we're not going to talk about that one today. We're going to start with fluoride. Conventional dentistry will tell you that you need fluoride to grow healthy teeth. However, there are definitely some risks with fluoride consumption. If you look at some of the literature on this, there is some animal models that show that it is quite harmful. The conventional tap water system has decent amount of fluoride particles in there already, in most places in the US. Interestingly enough, one thing Germany did right, at least in Berlin, is they banned fluoride from the water system. At least the Germans are ahead of the curve on that, and recognizing that there are some risks long-term with that. Potential problems could be Alzheimer's, increased risk of diabetes, and thyroid disruption. If you look at the periodic table, fluoride is in the same column as iodine. The iodine binds to our thyroid, makes our thyroid work properly. Fluoride could potentially disrupt that and potentially cause some thyroid issues, whether that's hypothyroidism, which is, I'm seeing a rather large percentage of the population have hypothyroidism, and autoimmune thyroid conditions. Here's more on the incidence with diabetes and fluoride. Folic acid supplementation. So folic acid is not the same as folate. Methylfolate is what we need to methylate our DNA. It helps a lot of processes in the human body. Folic acid, on the other hand, is a synthetic substance that is more bioavailable to the human body. But that doesn't mean it's what we actually need. It binds to the receptors more readily, and it doesn't allow folate to bind to the receptors. So what happens is you can actually get a folate accumulation in the body, in the bloodstream, and this can actually cause problems in itself, but then it inhibits folate from binding to receptors in the body that allows you to methylate your DNA properly. So I do not recommend folic acid supplementation. Natural folate is found in meats, in greens, and you can get higher quality supplements that have actual methylfolate in it. NSAIDs, so this is your aspirin, your ibuprofen, your Motrin, Advil, naproxen, meloxicam, diclofenac. A lot of patients, if they get a fever, they will take these anti-inflammatory medications. However, they do cause a lot of harm. One most obvious one is that they cause ulcers in the stomach. Two, they can cause kidney damage. And they can potentially impede sports athletic recovery, specifically inhibiting protein synthesis at the muscle. A lot of athletes will say, oh, I don't get sore because I take an ibuprofen afterwards. Don't do that, it inhibits your muscle recovery. So I would only use these antipyretics known as anti-fever substances only if the child or you are very miserable, you're suffering a lot, sure, take some ibuprofen, but don't take it just for the sake of treating the fever. I always tell my patients, don't do that. Fever is a natural response. We don't try to suppress our fever in the first place. Proton pump inhibitors. These things are ubiquitous in the American population. Everyone's on these acid-blocking medications for acid reflux. However, they have a lot of long-term harms. One of the most obvious ones is increased risk of long bone fractures. So you know your grandmother, you maybe heard of an older person, they stand up at night, they snap their femur, and they have to go into surgery and get a rod replaced. This is for a lot of reasons, but a growing trend is these acid-blocking medications, specifically proton pump inhibitors. And even conventional medicine recognizes that these are harmful. But there's a lot of other reasons. B12 deficiency, low magnesium, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. We actually have a very high stomach acidity, a pH of 1.5 in our stomach. That inhibits bacteria from seeding our intestines. If we disrupt this, we can actually change our pH in our stomach from 1.5, which is equivalent to some vultures and birds of prey, to that of the hippopotamus. We can change our stomach acidity to about 4.4 by taking omeprazole. And you know, hippopotamus is a large animal that eats grass. We are actually more similar to the bald eagle in that matter. Here's that diagram on the increased risk of fractures. Here's more on why we need stomach acidity. And here's the chart, very interesting chart. pH of a bald eagle is 1.3. The human stomach acidity is 1.5. And you can see, all right, where's my favorite one here? The deer is 5.5 and the rhino is 3.3. So we are meant to be carnivores. Fiber and colorectal cancer. So there's a lot of general recommendations in the conventional medicine to just increase fiber. If you actually look at the scientific literature on does it prevent cancer, does it improve digestion, not necessarily, and it really depends on what specific fiber you're using. I use fiber in my practice for very specific indications. Say we have a female with estrogen dominance, we improve their fiber, we help that bind to excess estrogen, eliminate from the intestines. So there are specific reasons to implement fiber, but generic recommendations to increase fiber can actually increase the problem itself. Specifically, in patients with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, these patients have high fermentation in their digestive tract. If they eat a bunch of fiber, this is just going to increase flatulence, make them bloated. They're going to feel awful. Gluten, bread products, grains. They've told you now for 50 years that grains are heart healthy, will protect you from cardiovascular disease. This is actually not the case. Gluten, on the other hand, is an endocrine disruptor, and for many patients, it increases their autoimmune conditions, right? Especially the conventional bread, the way it's made in the store. You see it sit on the shelf, it's good for months. It doesn't get moldy. This isn't natural. If you get a good bread made from a bakery, a Simply Bread, I recommend them on O'Galley, it goes bad in about a day or two. So conventional gluten, what it does is it opens up your cell walls in your intestines. This allows gut permeability. So you have to think about it like this. You eat a foreign protein, well, you eat any protein, right? If you have this open gap junction, as you see here in the diagram, it allows food particles to enter your bloodstream. What does your body do when it sees a foreign particle in your bloodstream? It attacks it. If this happens over time, again and again and again, you develop an immune reaction to this. Autoimmune disease, anything from autoimmune thyroid disease, arthritis, eczema, you name it. Gluten is a huge problem with this. And one of the first things I do with patients with autoimmune conditions is get them off the gluten. Antidepressants increase suicidality and are not better than placebo. I actually worked in psychiatry before I started doing this, and I felt like it was shooting fish in a barrel, whether a patient was actually going to get better with the antidepressant or not. Antidepressants do work in some patients, but in other patients, it makes them worse and increases suicide. And I've seen it happen. So there are better ways to treat depression, and we do an integrative method with that at my clinic. And yes, antidepressants can work, but I would always recommend screening patients through genetic testing to see if the antidepressant would work or not. Statins, these cholesterol-lowering medications, they don't prevent mortality from heart attacks or strokes. This is one of the most interesting recent studies that came out to get with the guideline study that included about 300,000 patients admitted with a heart attack or a stroke in the hospital. What they found is that half of these patients had a normal LDL, a normal cholesterol panel, which for the past 70 years they've been telling us is the reason for heart disease. This study showed that you can still have a heart attack or stroke with a normal LDL. Now, one of the good things that my conventional training did, the first class that we had was evidence-based medicine. And what we looked in this class was how many patients we needed to treat with a statin to save one life. The number needed to treat is 104. We need to treat 104 patients with a statin to save one life. So these statin drugs, they do have some role, but I don't think it's because of the cholesterol. These medications are anti-inflammatory. So there's a certain subset of the population that have a high inflammatory risk, and I can measure this with advanced testing. These patients may benefit from a statin. However, putting everybody on a statin with a high LDL does not help people, and the number needed to harm is a lot lower. We only need to treat patients with 50 medications, with 50 pills of or 50 prescriptions of a statin to give them diabetes. We only need to treat 10 of them to give them muscle damage. And liver damage is another story. Saturated fats cause heart disease is also false. They've been telling you all for 70 years that saturated fat causes heart disease. They don't. And no one knows about this, but back in 2020 during the COVID pandemic, the American College of Cardiology actually came out and said that saturated fat doesn't cause heart disease. This should have been like on the tabloid news everywhere. This is huge news, but no one heard about this story. And that's the American College of Cardiology telling us that. But still, if you Google search and you click on news, you'll always see this propaganda. You'll see, especially from vegan sources, that plant-based is healthier, eat the vegan burgers, and red meat still causes heart disease. So there's still all this misinformation out there. And yes, it's misinformation. I don't know why this is still allowed on the internet. They censor everything else. Low-salt dietary interventions to reduce blood pressure and prevent cardiovascular mortality are misguided. Very interesting. If you look at low-salt studies, you put a patient on a low-salt diet, it can lower blood pressure by 0.4 millimeters of mercury. That's nothing. That's less than a point. But what it actually does is it can increase mortality. So these recommendations just to lower salt are also misguided. There is a new theory of hypertension. I practice this a lot in my practice, is educating patients on the true reasons for hypertension. And it's an inflammatory condition of the blood vessel walls. We look at the diet of the patient. We optimize a lower inflammatory diet. We get back the right nutrients that they're missing, and potentially we get them on the right medications or supplements. Yes, medications are needed sometimes. For some older gentleman, he has high blood pressure. Maybe they need testosterone replacement. Testosterone replacement is a hugely under-recognized reason and medication that can help treat blood pressure in an older man. But my colleagues in conventional medicine, they go right to the statin, or right to the blood pressure lowering medication, which sure can lower it, but you're not treating the root cause, which is inflammation, maybe hormonal dysregulation, maybe some toxin, right? We have to figure it out. So yeah, saturated fat does not clog arteries. And I like this guy here. He'll tell me this is false information. Vegetables and seed oils, they are not healthy. We do not like to consume canola oil, cottonseed oil. You know, some of my favorite businesses, I'm not going to name names, but I found out the other day that one of my favorite wing places is reusing the same cottonseed oil the entire month, the day in, day out, to refry their chicken wings. This is extremely toxic to the human body. This leads to endocrine abnormalities, high blood pressure, and I believe also cancer, because these are super oxidized vegetable oils. They're already oxidized. They come out of the plant. They're basically machine lubricants made for, machines, not for humans. But they've been telling us, for some reason, for the past 70 years, that these are healthier than butter, healthier than lard, or healthier than beef. We can see over the past, what is this? This is the past 60 years here, an increasing rate of soybean oil consumption in the U.S. and the prevalence of obesity by age and sex. And we can see a correlation there. We're not supposed to make correlation causation, but I don't think this needs to be ignored, this trend of increasing the seed oils and the increased risk of disease, modern disease in the American population. Omega-3 to omega-6 balance. So you can see here the highest proportion of omega-6s are typically these seed oils. Grapeseed oil, safflower oil, corn oil, soybean oil, cottonseed oil. So this is a new theory for disease and inflammation, and it's this imbalanced trend. So the simple way is to just cut out these nasty seed oils and replace it with real beef, real fish, and better sources of oils. Eggs are healthy for you. Wow, surprise. Thyroid toxins, a little bit more on thyroid toxins here. Excess dietary iodine, very interesting. Table salt. Not a huge fan of just conventional table salt. I don't think it's healthy. I think Celtic sea salt may be the best option. Goitrogens, so interestingly enough, a lot of plants have inbuilt toxins in them. So unfortunately, for some hypothyroid patients, autoimmune thyroid patients, eating a plant-based diet can actually be more harmful due to the goitrogen property of cruciferous vegetables, some beans, soy. Let's see here. Glyphosate. Glyphosate is a toxic pesticide that is used on all our fruits and vegetables. It is endocrine disruptor. It promotes cancer. Fortunately, the poor Mexican migrants in the fields working with this sort of product often develop very weird leukemias and cancers. Maybe that's why they want undocumented workers, because they won't then go sue them. So most healthcare providers are unaware of these things, but I created Iron Direct Primary Care because I curate providers who understand this, who I educate, who are continuing to educate themselves on the real health, because there's just so much bad healthcare out there, and patients are getting hurt every day, not just from these vaccines, but through everything. I think these vaccines are just kind of like the tip of the iceberg, like that icing on the cake that is waking everyone up to all this harm that's being done in medicine. Right, the second leading cause of death, I think, after heart disease is medical error, and I think even that number is super low. Right, no one understands really the depth and damage that omeprazole does to people. We're sort of starting to recognize that antidepressants aren't so good for people. These low-salt diets and telling people to eat canola oil because it'll protect your heart. I think that's really dangerous, and I think a lot more people are hurt by that than we recognize. So if you have any questions, I know that was a lot.